So this month's theme is broken, and we are having a talk from the wonderful Matt Gough from USW, who is also on Twitter, mpgough. Follow him, copy him into everything that we're doing today. And without further ado, it's him.
Hi. Really good to see you here. My name is Mathew Gough. I am a lecturer in dance at University of South Wales. We start a new course in September. So it's really nice to be asked here, to talk about broken. It's very relevant today for, for various reasons. My take on broken is essentially something that sits philosophically. So the question that is being asked here is a koan, which is it the wind that moves or the flag that moves? And I want to frame this in a way of saying that actually the way in which we conceive of the broken is always philosophical. That's how we frame something. And that's the really important thing that I want to engage with. And it's easy to think of the philosophic as something conceptual, but it's not. It's applied, it's practical and lived. Feminist philosophers act out and engage with their philosophy. Vegans, vegetarians, yeah? Socialists, radical socialists. Philosophy is a way of living and being, not just as a way of thinking, yeah? And it's this way of thinking that ultimately frames our notions of the broken. So when we sit there and say the broken is actually an engageable aesthetic, we like to engage with the broken as an alternative to the beautiful. It becomes an iteration when we say, okay, we've made 100 pots, or we've made 100 compositions, and they're the kind of broken bits along the way to make that nice, perfect one. It's a provocation. I break a painting to make a political statement. I break a window to make a political, social statement, yeah? It has a function. Overdrives on amps, it's broken, yeah? The sound waves are peaking out and you get compression, but we like that because of its aesthetic, and we sit in a particular place with it. And all of these wrap up in an intentionality about saying, what do we see as fixed, and how do we frame that as a single entity? So my philosophy is really one of improvising. Gary Peters frames it as, my inclination is to try something else if things don't seem to be working. And in his book, he talks about improvisation as a kind of scrap heap challenge, to take something that's broken, bits that are broken, and make something functional about them. Now, that's not quite where I sit with improvisation. For me, the proviso of an improviser is to engage with difference. You engage with difference not because something is broken, not because something is unfunctional, but because difference is the key. It's easy to think about dance improvisation. You probably think of someone saying, oh, just dance with your emotions, but that leads you to habit. It leads you to dancing the same structure. It's a score in itself. And it doesn't really engage with what emotions are. They sit between affect, effect, feelings, and sensations, which can all lead you to different place. A sensation is the start, and then we layer other things on top of that. And if we only ever keep on layering the same way, we'll only ever see in the same way. So for me, improvisation is about seeing your options. The choices are relevant. Your ability to see options is what's most important. You know? So we can look at a picture and we can say, where might I choose to focus? How might I choose to frame? All of those options are the important thing in your craft, rather than the choice. Yeah? And what might be broken in one context fits quite perfectly in another. We can think of it as in a score. So within a chord progression, we can see the options that we might circulate around modes. Now if you're working in a fixed setting, that doesn't necessarily mean you're improvising. You know, if I teach you a particular set of progressions and say, here, work with this, that's not improvising for me because you're not making the choice. It's that freedom of choice that keeps you improvising. So rather than seeing it as an improvisation on one end and structure on the other, I see them as circles. because fundamentally everything that's improvised has a structure. A dance improvisation has a length. I'm going to improvise for an hour. It has a structure that's to do with place. Yeah? Everything is structured. Improvisation is the navigation within that structure. So here the dotted lines kind of imply the volume of which something is improvised or navigated. So in improvisation, there's structure surrounding the whole. There's a large amount of improvisation and a small amount of composition. Composition for me is that kind of substructuring which you get to. A choreographed or a composed set work, there's only improvisation in the middle. Yeah? So it's about seeing your choices. If you have a script, the improvisation is how you navigate those words, those lines. Same with the musical score. So, as I said, for me, improvisation is a practice. I perform improvs from 15 minutes to an hour, group, solos, duets. And it's a fundamental part of my pedagogic practice. So when I teach, I improvise. And the way in which I mean that, I don't teach set exercises. So any of you who have kind of engaged in dancing, you probably know that there's lots of syllabus around, and week on week you keep on learning the same thing. That doesn't teach you to learn to dance, it teaches you a dance. So I teach principles, and the students get new exercises every single lesson. So this notion of trying to engage with difference is a core part of my practice because it makes the students engage with difference. It makes them understand all the contexts in which the work and movement might arrive. And it's how I ended up developing my own contact improvisation practice called dampening. So contact improvisation is a kind of dance form in which you work with momentum and weight. It's normally a paired form. It was invented by a guy called Steve Paxton. And when I came across it, it had some issues. So ultimately, contact improvisation should feel more like kind of hard bop or a Jackson Pollock painting. It has complexity and texture. And it's been turned into something that's very much painting by numbers or swing jazz. And so for me, what I noticed was that people had failed to understand how to deal with the moments where things broke down, the broken moments. They avoided them. They put in rules and strategies to avoid what happens when you fall, what happens when you collide. And in disengaging with that, they'd really stepped away from the pureness of the form, which was to deal with the moment, to deal with difference, to leave everything and left everything as the same. And so the practice I developed really sits around developing the skills to deal with stuff when things go wrong, to focus on what's broken in moments of practice. And yes, this happens through repetition, but repetition is about difference. Yeah? Like I said before, it's really easy. We think about, the general creative advice at the moment is make lots of things, throw away the stuff that's broken, and then you'll get to your end goal. But that's a position, rather than understanding that each individual action, each individual moment is important in its own right. Yeah? That repetition is difference. We're not engaging with the same. We don't step in the same river twice. Yeah? That uniqueness is framed because we're engaging with the same elements. So it's not to reduce the broken. Because it's in the things that we throw away that actually probably most of our knowledge exists, the knowledge of context. So if I was a potter and I make 100 pots, some of those might break in a kiln and I could throw those away as being broken, but I failed to notice why did they break? Is it something fundamentally to do with how I made those pots that makes them break in the firing? Is it to do with the structure of the kiln and therefore I should change my kiln? Is it to do with the composition of the clay that I'm using and therefore that's the thing that I should change? I could give my pots to people and they might break them. Okay? They throw away the pots, but there's still learning to be done there. Does it teach me about how people use pots? Should I re-educate people how to use my pot? Should I redesign the material? Should I redesign the pot so it doesn't break? It allows you to ask those fundamental questions by looking at what we would normally discard and seeing what it has to tell us about something. So for me, context is always equal to or greater than the instance in which something happens. Saying it's broken only focuses on the one instance, yeah? Which is why we have that notion of saying, the glass is already broken, yeah? The moment at which the glass breaks, it reveals what was always there. It reveals a continuity. And if we only focus on the moment that the glass smashed, we forget everything else that led up to that moment and everything that comes afterwards. And all of those things are actually really important things for us to engage with as artists and makers. Because as Ted Nelson says, everything is deeply intertwined. So Ted Nelson is kind of one of the forerunners of the internet. His notion of Xanadu was a kind of two-way text. So if the internet had worked in the way in which he wanted, everything would be two-way links rather than one way. If you quoted a piece of text, it would be transcluded, i.e. included on the new website. And if you changed your original, the quote would change as well. So a really deep notion of saying that things are interlayered, things are mixed, and therefore we shouldn't classify things in one way. To say it's broken implies it only ever had a single purpose. It only ever had a single function, but we can only view it in one way. And so going back, reiterating, practicing, exploring allows us to understand the breadth of options and opportunities. And this frames very closely to the notion of post-structuralism, post-modernity, the concept of the rhizome, where things are on multiple levels, where we can treat learning and understanding as a map of things. So all too often we're given traces, Like the referendum is one of those great examples that people said there's one way and there's one option and one option. Follow the path, take your options. Rather than looking at it as a map and saying, actually, we can enter into this discussion in any way which we like. We can wander around and find our way to a greater understanding, It's terrible news today, but there are other options. It wasn't just a yes or a no. There are other mechanisms by which we can engage with politics. But unless we engage with the map, we don't find those. And all we ever do is engage with a trace. We say, what's the ruling ideology? What does our practice define and ask us to do? And we follow that blindly without question. And we discard the things we think have been conceptually broken in it, rather than recognizing they're just trends. And because ultimately everything is broken, and for me this was something I learned very clearly in improvising. So I'm sure you've all been in those moments where you've kind of had an accident and you see time slow down, Your perception is made kind of heightened, for want of a better word. And that's because the way in which we navigate this world is false. We live in a virtual reality. It's not real. You should see two of me and I should be upside down, but you don't. Yes? Visual illusions, sound-based illusions point to the brokenness of our being in this world. And so ultimately, we exist and navigate and explore this world by engaging with the broken elements and exploiting them. So as a dancer, there are visual ways in which I can teach myself to slow down time visually whilst I'm working. To be able to have a really wide sense of view, because I understand eyes don't look at one point, they zig around and we build an image. So I can have a very wide field of view. I can look at things without looking at them directly, because I understand that the brokenness reveals part of functionality. And if I can engage and exploit with that, I'm all the richer. And so this, for me, is how we navigate emergence, how we navigate the surprises. By looking for difference, by looking for the broken and teaching ourselves the skills with which we can engage with that. Things shouldn't be surprising because we should always expect change. And as an improviser looking for difference, I notice change. And it's not a surprise, but I recognize the different magnitudes of change because there isn't a value set placed on that. So I can see when I'm working with someone, if they've introduced something that feels different to the practice, I can engage in discussion with them and understand what perspective they're coming from, and if that's something that I want to exploit, utilize, draw on, develop. It's how I grow as a teacher, it's how I grow as an individual performer, by looking for not what I expect to see, but by looking at everything equally and paying attention to those things that don't really seem to fit, because ultimately that's what emergence is. It's where something fits outside our normal structures and categories, We don't need to think outside the box if we don't constrain ourselves to linear thinking. Because for me, intuition is not about gut, it's knowledge. It's propositional knowledge, it's formal knowledge, it's a knowing that, Intuition is based on our experience. It's a good, qualified, educated guess based on what has happened to us and knowing that there are sets of variables. So rather than just going, oh, it's my gut, it's my emotion, intuition sits in a place where I say, I think these things are possible, I think these things are maybes, and so I will try. And by developing the skills, be they physical, practical, mental, you're able to do the how because you understand how to work out procedures in real time. And for me, that comes back to the skill. How often do you skill yourself up with dealing with the broken? You know, in drama improvisation, there's a real notion where you don't say no to anything. You go along with what's been set up. So if I set a scene and go, we're in a bar, no one's going to change that because they don't deal with the skill of things that break. Yeah? It's that same compulsion when someone says, don't play a bum note. Why? Yeah? In dance, there isn't a no because we don't engage with those type of structures. Blocking someone is of equal use. So I have a thing called the no duet when I'm teaching contact improvisation. It's the no duet. One person dances their solo, has a very clear idea about what their solo is and how it functions. The other person's goal is simply to stop them by any route possible. Yeah? It forces the person who's being stopped to make decisions, to try things, to learn and engage in that set of experience. Yeah? That they might think something is possible and they have a go at it. They understand whether they have the physical ability to do that. And over time, the repetition gives them the skill. It makes them think quicker. And so they don't sit in a place of going, I'm being stopped, therefore I cannot move, which is most people's initial response, or to try and force their way out of the system. When in reality, there are multiple options available to you. Because knowledge is much more useful to us than we might think, even in the notion that empiricism is broken, right? That we understand when things are missing and we still put them in place. So we kind of go, oh, that was a bum note, because conceptually you understand what should be there, yeah? So even in a situation where information is absent, we can still make informed guesses based on what we expect to be there or what we might propose could be put in place, yeah? So even without knowing what the outcome is, we either know what should be there or what to look for. And that, for me, is equally part of the notion of engaging with the broken. What's absent, what's missing? If we understand what's missing from the picture, we have a place to explore, to research, to understand. If we listen to people and we hear them say things that we kind of go, how can you think that? Rather than just going, your view is broken, understanding why they hold that perspective is the way in which we engage them in change. And so with students, I engage very much in a critique of the broken. So for example, the student would have shown a work, or we've done a group of improvisation. Everyone gives feedback. We do it in a circle. We rotate ways. No one can say the same thing. You're not allowed to talk about things you like. Things you like are self-evident. The things that are nice are self-evident. They're obliged to talk about the things that they think are broken or don't resonate for them. And this isn't a notion of being negative. Yeah, that's the philosophical stance. Broken is negative, but it's not. Hearing what doesn't chime for people allows you to understand how other people read your work. It's the critique we want as professionals, right? For someone to say, how is your work received? For someone to really give you some solid, honest context on how they engage with your work. And for me, the educational system allows that. It allows a space in which we can simply talk about what doesn't function for us, why we feel it doesn't function. And hearing that across an entire group of people only helps us understand what we're engaging with. Because ultimately it allows us to ask, what is it we're doing? You know, what did you do then? I couldn't understand what it was. It didn't chive for me. How did you do that thing? Why did you arrive there, you know? Or what other processes or strategies might be useful? And again, coming back to the why. We can't sit on assumptions. We should always ask those sets of questions for ourselves. So ultimately, for me, the philosophy of dealing with the broken is a call against orthogonality. It's about saying, stop looking at things in a kind of a binary structure, saying it's broken and I engage with that as an aesthetic and I look for the good. It's about saying, move away from those expectations and structures that we set out for ourselves as being something of good or of quality, and to engage in all of our practices with a sense of what's different, what's engaging, what are my processes. I always say to students that you should be able to understand the function of your practice before it breaks. If you wait up until the point that you're not inspired, that you've lost your passion, it's very hard to get it back because you've never known how it's operated. And so the real key for me is engage in functionality, engage with the stuff that doesn't work, break your practice, find those things, and that gives you the long-term engagement, you know? And as a professional working in an evolving, developing world, noticing where your practice starts to be decaying, shifting, keeps you more agile, as long as you engage in the everyday skill of saying, I can deal with the broken, I can face up to the broken because it isn't a negative, because it isn't something that I have to fear from, because broken is different. And if I engage in a different set of perspectives, then I can have a different set of information, knowledge, engagement, passion about the things that I do. Thank you.